Hi, I'm Rachel Nilson, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our podcast, CPL Ignites, sparking thoughtful conversations with community leaders. I'm really excited about this podcast because it gives an opportunity for us to talk about lessons learned, talk about stories that these people have, and to really talk about how we can all make a meaningful impact in our community. Before we dive into our first episode, a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Nilson. I'm an architect at CPL. I have been in the industry for a little over 10 years, and I work here at CPL in our Charlotte, North Carolina office. I've really gravitated towards these types of community projects because of the impact that they have, because of the being able to talk to all of the people in the community and really see them use the buildings and see the impact that it has on all of those people and all of those communities. I'd like to tease our first guest on our first podcast here. Harold Owen is a friend, a colleague of mine. I've known him for about the last 4 years or so. And through that time, we've spent a lot of time together at conferences, in meetings, and just kind of talking about the state of the communities, the state of North Carolina, and the state of Parks and Recreation in North Carolina specifically, and really talking about how things are changing, those trends, things to look for, and ways to make a bigger impact. So we'll get started. Well, Harold, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Good morning, Rachel. It's good to see you on this sunny day.
Yes. Well, what I want to do is kind of, I know you know a lot of the audience here, but kind of have you introduce yourself to everyone. I guess give us your kind of elevator pitch of who, what, where, why you do what you do.
Well, I'm Harold Owen. In my former life, I started off actually out of college, actually, in 1975 in Parks and Recreation. And it was as we make decisions in college where we want to do, and I started off in the economics and trying to figure out things and this and that, but I went that route, and I feel like I'm one of the fortunate people that made the right decision and really enjoyed what I did the rest of my career. And I say that, and I'm very blessed for that. But I came to Burlington. I had done an internship in 1974. Part of the curriculum in North Carolina State was you were required an internship. And 1975 was in the middle of a recession. When we graduated in May, got a call in probably 1st of August about an opening and kind of a leadership opening. And I was very fortunate to get that. So I'm one of the few people now, and I understand everybody how things are, but I was one of the few people who basically had a 40-year career with the city of Burlington. The first, it was divided up almost in equal terms. The first 13 years was working with community centers, special facilities, something that I began to really love, developmental disabled opportunities for both youth and adults. And kind of grew in the system, and then was named director in 1988. And we were able to, it was just a magical time where we had some facility needs, and literally worked with then Bill Moser and Ken Mayer on the development of a number of really nice projects, 2 major sports complexes, a marina, parking marina, a senior facility, and obviously started a really really nice public tennis facility that where all the high school state championships are played at now, an aquatic center. So there were some major projects that I was involved with that gave me an opportunity in Parks and Recreation to learn what went into the planning, what went into the operations, not only operations to prepare it, but then to help design it, realizing what our operational costs might be, going forward. And then in 2002, I had an opportunity and applied, and I became the city manager, and I stayed in that position until the end of 2015 when I retired. A failed retirement is the way I look at it. I actually got a call from CPL in 16 to do some work with them, and have been doing that ever since. And in late 17, I got a call from the North Carolina League of Municipalities to do some what's called a municipal operation consultant work, where we deal with communities, cities, their elected officials, their town management, specifically in the areas of financial needs or financial responsibilities. And that has led now, as we speak today, into the American Rescue Plan funding, which is, for anyone listening to this, it's a once in a career opportunity in terms of people of communities taking advantage of some money that has been that I've never seen before in terms of the amount of the funds, and also how you can potentially leverage that. So I'm on a committee there with the league that is looking at what's available with expenses, which is not in this huge federal legislation. There's a lot of variables there, and trying to determine, how to give advice to municipal leaders in terms of where they might want to look forward to and utilizing their funds. For all that being said, we'll still, we met yesterday for 3 hours. We're still trying to go through, because there's not just a obvious list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But what is exciting, Rachel, and what I would bring up to anyone now, is that the concept of the leveraging of funds here, because with the ARP program, not only money went to your local cities, it went to the counties, it went to the school system, and also the state has money, and the governor's office have money, the Senate and the House have funds. So we were on a webinar last Thursday, and that was sort of the mindset is, how can you leverage funds working with partners to get a potentially a bigger project, or a project that you would like to have that you might not have the funds to do just with what you have, in other words. Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting ongoing discussion. Now, how all the specifics have not been spelled out yet, but it could be some really nice projects in the state.
It's a really fun and challenging time for some of those local municipalities to kind of figure out what those priorities are, and kind of how best to use the funds that they have. So definitely exciting, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. I wanted to ask you, so you've spent pretty much your entire career in Burlington. Why that decision? Why right now a lot of people move around a lot, but it sounds like you've had the opportunity to kind of invest yourself in that community. Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I looked at a couple of jobs at times, and they were timing is everything, because I had married in 78 or 79, and then we had 2 children. So as your career grows, then it becomes as your children get into schools, uh, that makes that decision to move sometimes a little more difficult. So we stayed here, and we I haven't regretted it. The kids had a great education. They both done very well, and it's you become a part of the community, and I think that is one thing, Rachel, that I believe is that I am believing more every day. In municipal government or county government, the Parks and Recreation Director may be almost the biggest asset in terms of being part of the community, because they normally deal with all segments of the population, kids, adults, developmentally disabled, challenged individuals, people of all type of special interest in terms of facility desires. And you get embedded, and honestly, you get a little bit, it's always a tough decision for anyone who leaves a company or whatever, but especially with family. But that's it. I haven't regretted it. I actually, for some reason, got talked into running for city council in 2017, which I was lucky enough to win. And now, unfortunately, it's filing time again. So it's another election, which is, I got to consider what I'm going to do there. But I probably will go forward for at least one more term, because you can be part of trying to draw some lines in the sand about where the community needs to go. And I think now going forward, and as you will see out in here, and as all of the people who are watching this will see, is that many of the town elected officials, will need some guidance here, because they just simply haven't had this opportunity in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that small town, middle-sized towns, large town makes no difference. So we'll see how that plays out, but that's my story, and I'll stick to it.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that I personally, I love working on the community projects, because you get to talk to and meet so many different types of people working on those projects, and really see the impact throughout the entire community, not just one segment of the population. So those Parks and Rec projects really are really fun. And so I think that's a really interesting perspective, and kind of the impacts and all of that too. Let's dive in. I wanted to kind of touch base on one of the things you said at the beginning about how learning about the operations side, you were able to kind of learn about that, not only in terms of kind of the day-to-day, but in terms of integrating with the design, and how that kind of really helped you also get to that city manager position, and really to be able to understand how all of that goes together. So tell us a little bit more about how operating management and expenses play a role in how you make some decisions in terms of design of Parks and Rec facilities.
It starts, Rachel, with a groundswell of support from the public in terms of the demand for service. Mm-hmm. And then you begin to, as if you're in the profession, you will be asked on numerous occasions, why don't we have A, B, C, or D available to us? We have a number of kids basketball teams or volleyball efforts or fitness demands, and we don't have a building big enough that can be programmed to provide those needs. Or the same thing for athletic facilities, whether it's soccer fields or baseball fields or or whatever it might be, lacrosse, the whole gamut of that. So you get an understanding from your public. Now, most towns and cities will have something called a Recreation and Parks Commission, which is a commission that's appointed by the city council to work with the Recreation and Parks leadership as they make policies and look at the needs of the community, which is really good. I mean, that's the way government's supposed to work, really, if you think about it. So all that comes into play, and then you begin to look at, and where I've always have enjoyed finance and economics, and then you start to begin to look at the philosophy of, okay, what's not only the cost of construction, but also going to be the cost of operations, whether it's a indoor facility or an outdoor facility or whatever, because all that's going to be there. And then that's when it gets to, and you have to do that, because as you present a project up the food chain, and when it gets to the manager or to the elected officials, in most communities, those questions are going to be asked, because you're going to have people on city councils and the manager who's going to ask those questions. They have to. If they don't, they're really not doing their jobs. So you have to lay this out. And honestly, what we did early on in Eastern Burlington, Burlington and High Point was the first two cities in North Carolina that went with a fairly aggressive fees and charges program. We found out that if you provided a quality service, it wasn't exorbitant in terms of what you charged, but that you could then recover some revenues. And in the same place, same time, it depended on the facility that you designed, that would, if you had that in mind in the design process, those potential revenues coming in would even increase, which would offset some of the expense side that the public would need to cover as part of the Recreation and Parks annual fiscal year budget. And we really pressed that, and that was, again, some communities were very opposed to that, and because of what had gone on in the past years. I think everyone now understands how that has to be a viable thought pattern to pay for not only what you build, but then to pay for maintaining it and operating it going forward. So,
well, yeah, and you and I have talked about this in the past too, but so those kinds of community spaces want to be low cost from a user fee standpoint. So how do you keep some of those like fees from the user standpoint, the community standpoint, pretty low, but still bring in some of those revenues? Is there a way to kind of offset it with different types of rentals or things like that?
Yeah, it can. Yeah, especially for the objective that in the plan that I actually wrote when I went back to graduate school in '89 to get a master's in public administration was focusing on that. How do you look at your potential user groups and determine what the public would understand in reference to fee structures? So, for example, in youth programming, those fee structures were not nearly, the percentage of what it would recover was not the same. For example, we have a golf course. Concept on that golf course is to try to make that thing as much as possible to break even. Public golf course, which is a challenge at times, I'm gonna be honest. So we looked at youth groups, we looked at seniors. We cannot give scholarships. That's a legal question in terms of, you possibly could do it, but the administration of trying to figure out who would get the scholarship and finding out how much their parents, their income is somewhat overwhelming. So that was sort of the way we built this. And at one time, honestly, in the late 80s, and maybe even in the early 90s, we were almost 42% self-supporting with fees and charges. Now, we had a couple of interesting facilities. We had literally a park in the middle of town, and it's part of it is an amusement park. We have a original 1909 Denzel carousel, a miniature train for people around the state. This park is much like, not quite as large maybe as Pullman Park in Raleigh. And that became not only something for our own community to use, but that's where it became a regional use of people coming in, bringing their kids in, because it wasn't expensive. It was some form to do on a weekend or whatever. And that, all that then is the philosophy that I use, and actually was part of my graduate work at UNCG, was the ongoing economic impact that people coming into your community using your facilities had, especially on if they overnight hotels, but particularly on restaurants. And when you get that information out, you quickly tend to get business owners to support your ventures, because you've almost got to show it to them and say, look, when you bring as we are in right now, when we built some really nice baseball complexes, after the pandemic, when you're bringing 70 or 80 teams in, or soccer is a huge numbers that come in, it's the economic impact in your community is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point to make, is that as Parks and Rec directors are developing these types of projects, there are those particular projects that maybe have more of the regional draw and that kind of connection back to the business side of things, and hotel motel taxes, sales taxes, restaurant is important to look at in terms of that Parks and Rec facility, not just being for the community, but being kind of a tourist attraction to some degree as well, for the regional area.
In our community, we would always, we're not a large community. We're 55,000 people, 54,000. But I recall in our community, you could always tell there were specific restaurants. First of all, Elon University is here. Now, Parents' Day, graduation, everything's packed, okay? But you could always tell when you had major events. An adult event actually more benefited maybe a different venue than in some ways a kids event. But as you and I was in an interview in Belmont, ironically, the night before the pandemic closed everything down, which was a successful interview because of what you guys did. But I knew many parents who basically their family vacations in the summer was following their kids around for youth activities. And there's a lot of downtime in these tournaments. Kids don't play they may play at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's why at times, if it's possible, and we actually had this in our back of our mind when we built our two major youth athletic centers, was to have them close, if in 5-10 minute drive to substantial restaurants and retail establishments. And I can't give you a specific number of how much revenue it brought in, but I can tell you that a lot of those owners of those businesses are very appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, in our work recently with the Kernersville Rec Center, it's we've taken a really hard look during programming at what are the spaces, how are the spaces used during the week by the community, and then maybe on the weekends through some of the sports tourism or rentals or other different types of larger community events that can kind of offset some of those expenses and create some revenues to for that kind of facility. So I think that's really interesting to see how you've done that before in Burlington, and that's kind of definitely a trend coming through. Maybe not a trend, because I think it's here to stay, is the sports tourism market and how that plays an impact in the types of facilities that are being built too.
And to give due credit, Spartanburg, South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina has been really leaders in this. Virginia Beach did much of the same. We learned a lot. We've been visiting some of these other communities, and that's what I would certainly recommend to any of the people in the operation side now, is to go visit and look, because you can learn an awful lot from other people. And the great part about recreation people, and for that matter, I think municipal and county government, they're willing to share information because they're not competing with you. It's not like a manufacturing facility or something of that nature. So it's an interesting dynamic, which I do not see changing. I do think there's parents, and I know my oldest daughter is one now, that her husband played traveling soccer. She played tennis here and did some USTA tennis, but both of them are professional people, and her belief is that her kids, they want to play sports there in the Raleigh area, but with both of their lives so busy, this traveling every weekend long distances sometimes become a challenge. So it can go both ways on that spectrum of how each parent is gonna react and what they would like to do.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks a lot to the variety of options that a lot of these communities offer and need to offer in order to appeal to all these different types of people and groups and activities. So,
and now with what we see, and this is great, I think, is and I hope we get to do more of this work with CPL, is the outdoor activities in reference to mountain biking, to hiking. An awful lot of young families have gone that route.
We saw those numbers just kind of skyrocket during the pandemic too.
Yes.
With just people needing to get out of their house, but not being able to do some maybe more organized activities, to just do some more of that kind of passive recreation.
And it's and again, I'm going to use my family as an example. My son-in-law likes to play golf, but golf is sort of kind of going out of the wayside of a 7 and a 5-year-old, because they can go mountain biking in the morning, and a 7-year-old mountain bikes with him for like an hour and a half, and it doesn't take the whole day like some functions might. Same thing, and then the other side of it is when you have the soccer, the baseball, the lacrosse, the tennis tournaments. It's more of a weekend type deal. And another sport that we got into really early was BMX racing. We built the BMX track, which is still very functional, and it's really good because it's actually run by a parents association. So our staff as a city is not in there, but we maintain it to some degree for them. So what fascinates me now with 3 young grandsons is the broad opportunities that kids have to choose, what they want to do. It's just not, you can do this or that. And I think will be an opportunity, not a challenge, but an opportunity for parks and recreation departments to to really broaden their scope of program options and facility options going forward.
Oh, yeah. So how has your role as an elected official kind of changed the way that you view kind of some of these facilities, building these new facilities, operating these kinds of public facilities?
You have to look at the finances going forward, not only just the cost up front. I admit I'm a homer, so on our council, I always lead the charge to do it because we see the impact of it. We've just completed a new aquatic center in one of our eastern parks, replacing an older pool, and the amount of use is, many of that, like you've been involved in designing, or it's just increased dramatically. It's a balancing act in the sense of the capital that you have to have on hand for the construction cost, or you can borrow the money. Now, in this day and time also, Rachel, is the interest rates are so low that the borrowing of money or the refinancing of existing loans can be extraordinarily helpful to many local governments, because they might have some bonds or long-term loans at an earlier date with a much higher interest rate. And the opportunity to refinance that can save the city and the town and the taxpayers considerable tax money.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a finance director comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
The relationship between a finance director and a recreation and parks director is always interesting. But again, that's a partnership that you got to build, because most finance directors are pretty conservative, and you sometimes got to take them out and show them and get them to understand, just not just from a financial side, but the impact of the community itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Harold, for all of your insight on this topic. We could kind of continue talking for hours about this, and we've done that before, but we'll probably save the rest for another day, so we can kind of keep these kind of to a shorter chunk of time for people listening and watching. I did want to close our conversation with a few fun kind of rapid fire questions, if you'll bear with me on these. What was your first job?
I worked in I grew up on a family farm, so I was working as like 7 or 8 years old, and then I also worked in in high school with the USDA in terms of doing plant pathology at a facility near where I grew up at, and that was pretty interesting.
Wow, very cool. Kind of led to your parks and recreation background with the working outside part of things, probably a little bit, and working with the environment.
Yeah, that was interesting.
What's your favorite recreational activity to do in the summer?
Well, it used to be playing golf to too many injuries to a shoulder from throwing too many balls or getting hit too hard by helmets has created that. But I was a fairly avid tennis player, because part of it was the thousands of tennis balls I had to my daughters. Now it's probably more hiking. It's probably more outdoor stuff, and now we go to the pool a lot with 3 grandchildren. So I will tell you, the importance of aquatic centers is never underestimated. My wife actually drives to Raleigh each day to keep our 3-year-old that's just moved back from Boston, and honestly, they go to the pool 4 days a week.
Wow.
So I mean,
very important community resource.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. Yes.
And if you could win an Olympic medal in any sport, what would it be?
Yeah, it would be a team sport. I play basketball. individual recognition is wonderful, but I think being part of a team builds relationships and that you have the rest of your life.
Mhm. Great to share that with other people too and stuff. So.
That's right. Yeah.
And lastly, because this is all about community and community leaders, what impact do you as a community leader want to leave on your community?
You want to make it better when you leave than before you got there. And you have to be open enough to understand the various challenges, but also the demands throughout a community. There are a majority, I'd say 95% of all of our communities in North Carolina, there are the population is whether it's economically based or ethically based or whatever, you've got to understand that. So your overall objective is to provide a high quality of services, no matter what it is, in a manner of which the people can understand and utilize, and at the same time be very efficient in providing those services. And as a manager, that becomes enormously important. As a council person, it becomes important, but the manager is one who puts the budgets together. But it's recognizing the needs ahead of time so you could plan to be able to finance those needs when the time comes to do it, whether it's a growth of many communities like you live in where you've got to add a fire station. You know, when you build a fire station, that's one thing, but then you're buying 2 trucks and adding like 16 people. Wonderful service, but that doesn't need to come up today and do it tomorrow. You plan for that. Mm-hmm. And same things in Parks and Rec. The advancement of Parks and Recreation directors in our state has been amazing. And the importance of Parks and Recreation Commission members can be really, really important in getting things done. And while they got to be careful of what's going on now, they also need to have the time to look for what needs to potentially need to happen and trends going forward.
Mm-hmm. Great answer, Harold. It's always a joy to talk to you. Love our conversations. So thank you for joining me, and we'll have to do another one of these on some other topic that we come up with. So
Rachel, you're a star in the profession, a young rising star, I can assure you.
Thanks again.
All right, take care.
Bye.